Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine, Chapter 24. In my letter, I played on Father's pride and described the part of my servitude that would most enrage him, tending the fire in front of the courtiers. How dare they treat me so? And against your express wishes, too. They order me about, and the more menial the task, the better. I beg you to come home. Many merchants trade right here in Frel. Why can't you join their number? Please come. My need is great. You know I would not ask otherwise. Come quickly. I am counting the days. Your daughter, Ella. I gave the letter to Mandy to post. Perhaps it would overtake Father on the road. The mail coach driver knew him. It might reach him before my earlier letter got to CHAR. Father could even be back in a few days. Until I saw him or heard from him, I would endure. I stayed out of my stepfamily's way as much as possible, and the longer I worked as a scullery maid, and the filthier I got, the less Hattie and Mum Olga tormented me. I think they gloried in my squalor as proof of my baseness. From Olive, though, there was no respite, and to escape from her, I hid. My most secure hideaway was the library. Although I never dared stay long, I was able to steal half hours reading Mum Olga's dusty tomes. No one ever thought to look for me there, or to visit for pleasure. I don't know whether I was more anxious to hear from Father or from CHAR. I kept thinking about CHAR and wishing to talk to him. If I thought of a joke, I wanted to try it on him. If I had a serious idea, I wanted his opinion. Although weeks passed without an answer from Father, my first letter from CHAR arrived only 10 days after I'd sent mine to him. Then, letter followed letter for the first 6 months of his absence, while I heard nothing from Father, and saw nothing of him either. As I had directed, CHAR sent his letters to Mandy, who pretended to have an admirer. Hattie and Mum Olga were vastly amused at Mandy's romance, but I failed to see why it was any more absurd than Mum Olga and Father. CHAR's hand was large and round, the letters evenly spaced, each fully formed, completely unlike my crabbed, spiky writing. His showed a balanced, honest nature, while Areta used to say mine proved me imaginative, impulsive, and always in a hurry.
Dear Ella, my name has been changed. Here they call me Echarmonte, which sounds more like a sneeze than a name. They can't pronounce CHAR, and I can't persuade them to call me Echar. They are so formal. They say, by your leave, more often than they say anything else. The Aorthians think before they speak, and often conclude, after lengthy meditation, that nothing need be said. The loudest beings in an Aorthian council are the flies. The occasional bee that finds its way in is deafening. I long for conversation. The ordinary Aorthians are talkative, but the nobles are not. They are kind. They smile easily, but speech for them is a single word, occasionally a phrase. Once a week they utter a complete sentence. On their birthdays they grant the world an entire paragraph. At first I chattered to fill the silence. In response, I received smiles, bows, thoughtful expressions, shrugs, and occasional perhaps by your leave. So now I keep my speeches to myself. In the garden this morning, I overtook the Duke of Endona. I touched his shoulder in greeting. He nodded companionably. In my mind, I said, "The flowers are marvelous. That one grows in Curia, but that other one I've never seen before. What do you call it?" In my imagination, he answered me, naming the flower, saying it was the Queen's favorite and that he'd be happy to give me the seeds. But if I'd really asked about a flower, he'd probably have continued strolling. He'd have thought, why does this prince clutter up a lovely day with talk? If I don't answer him, he may breathe in the sweet air, feel the gentle sun, hear the rustling leaves. Perhaps by now he regrets his question. But perhaps he thinks me rude for not answering him. However, if I speak now, I may startle him, which would be worse. It would be worse to have him think me rude. I must speak. But exhausted by his cogitation, he'd have energy left for one word. The name of the flower. I'm writing nonsense. In my first letter, I'd hoped to impress you with my brilliant prose, but that will have to wait for my second. Not many of my imagined conversations are with the Duke. Most of them are with you. I know what I would say if I were in Frau. I'd tell you at least 3 times how glad I was to see you. I'd speak more about Eortha, and with fewer complaints. And I'd describe my trip here, especially our adventure when one of the pack horses shied at a rabbit and tore off. But then I might turn Eorthian and trail off into silence, lost and smiling at you. The problem is, I can't guess at your response. You surprise me so often. I like to be surprised. But if I could supply your answers with confidence, I might miss you less. The remedy is obvious. You must write to me again, and quickly, and again, and more quickly. Your very good friend, CHAR.
In my reply, I gave him conversation. Greetings. How do you fare today? Lovely weather we've been having. The farmers predict rain, however. They say the crows are chattering. Ah, well, wet weather will do us good, I dare say. We can't have sunny days always. Life isn't like that, is it? Wish it were. Wouldn't that be fine? Never a disappointment, never a harsh word. Don't you agree, sir? A fine fellow such as yourself, you have sense enough to see it's never that way. In one dose, I hope I have cured you of your desire for conversation. My pen stopped. What could I tell him? I couldn't explain my servitude without telling about the curse. Then I recollected that Mum Olga had recently held a cotillion. I described it, omitting the detail that my participation had been limited to removing the dirty plates from the refreshments table. CHAR's reply was that the Eorthians didn't have balls.
They have sings, which are held monthly. 3 or 4 Eorthians at a time occupy the stage and in turn sing long, sad ballads, or happy tunes, or funny ones, joined by the whole throng in the choruses. The entire populace knows thousands of songs, and there is hardly a mediocre voice among them. Sound gushes forth from somewhere deep, their toes or their souls. For the last song, a paean to the rising sun, because they have performed through the night. They gather their families about them, husbands and wives and children clasp hands, tilt their heads heavenward, and release their music. And I, seated with a few other visitors, add my weak voice to theirs, humming when I can't guess the words and wishing my hands were held too. Perhaps we can come here together someday. By the way, you are a month older than the last time I saw you. Are you still too young to marry?
I chuckled at the joke. Then I thought of the bride I'd make, in a threadbare, sooty gown that stank of cooking fat and yesterday's dinner. CHAR repeated the query in every letter, probably because my answers were so silly that they pleased him. If not too young, I was too tired to marry, or too wet, too cross, or too hungry. Once I wrote, "If my years are measured by inches, then I am certainly too young. The 11-year-old daughter of an acquaintance dwarfs me." The acquaintance was Nancy, the serving maid. Another time I wrote, "Today I am too old to marry, 100 at least." I have spent the last 80 years and more listening to a lady detail the pedigree of every dinner guest tonight. The lady had been Hattie, and I had not attended the meal. I continued in a more serious vein. I have not found anyone in my step-family circle in whom I can confide, and there are few subjects about which my stepsisters and I share an opinion. It is great good luck that I have a pen and paper and a friend. Char's answer.
Now, my tongue may wither from disuse here, but at least I shan't lose words entirely while I still can write to you.
Sometimes I wondered what would happen if I told Char I was just the right age to marry. With each of his letters, I fell more in love with him, but I couldn't tell him. If I said I was old enough to marry, and his question had only been the continuation of a good joke, he would be horribly embarrassed, and our easy friendship would be ruined. He might stop writing, which I couldn't endure. If he wasn't jesting, it was for him to say so. Until then, or never, I treasured our correspondence.